On today's World Insight, top leadership diplomacy between China and Saudi Arabia as Chinese President Xi Jinping sets foot in the Middle East for meetings and a Saudi state visit. What's next for relations?
Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. With the invitation of the Saudi king, Chinese President Xi Jinping is paying a state visit to the kingdom this week. While there, the Chinese leader will also attend the first ever China-Arab States Summit and the China Gulf Cooperation Council Summit in the capital city of Saudi Arabia, Riyadh. As ancient civilizations, China and the Arab world are connected through hundreds of years of trade, influence, and history. That connection has been carried to modern times. Strong trade has underpinned ties with about 87 billion US dollars turnover in the year 2021, up 30% from the year before. In the Gulf region, China's trade with Arab states hit $330 billion, a 37% rise. Robust cooperation on more than 200 large-scale energy and infrastructure projects has benefited both sides. So how strategic are the visit and the summits? What new perspective the latest interactions between China and the Arab states will bring to all of us understanding the ever-changing world today? Let's loop in our panelists. I'm so glad to be joined by Mayor Javan Danfar, a Middle East analyst coming from Tel Aviv. Also joining us in Shanghai, Joseph Gregory Mahoney, professor of politics with East China Normal University. Last but not least, in Beijing, Zhou Rong, who is a senior analyst from the Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies with Beijing's Renmin University. Thank you so much for joining us. Gentlemen, the first ever China-Arab Summit. At this point, what do you see as the significance of this event? Professor Mahoney.
Well, you know, what we've seen, I think, in the last several years is China has increasingly begun to capitalize on the fact that it has become the major trading partner of many countries in the world, including the leading countries in the Middle East. And it's begun to refocus its foreign policy away from being, I think, too fixated on American concerns. It's strengthening relations with others. And this is really helping to push back, I think, against American pressures that have been growing against China, but also creating new opportunities for China to pursue new development opportunities through the Belt and Road Initiative, as well as ensure that China can meet energy needs and have access to other markets.
Mr. Javan Danfar, how do you analyze this event from where you are, Tel Aviv?
Well, I think this is to add to what Professor Mahoney said. This is basically the Arab world trying to balance its relations. In the Middle East, it's a fact that we have to confront that the U.S.-China strategic competition is heating up. You know, you have to be able to diversify your relations in this region.
I think China-Arab summit is a natural trend because China's influence in not only Arabic world but also in the Middle East is getting stronger and stronger, and almost all the Middle East issues the country concerned invited China to come. I don't think Arab countries are the new friend of China. China maintains the diplomatic relationship with all the Arabic League countries. I'm saying about 23 countries. We have the diplomatic ties with all of them. And of course, the difference between China and America is United States have about more than 100 military stations, military bases, and military facility within about 14 Middle East countries. China does not have. But China's global development initiative and the global security initiative and get more and more popular in the Middle East as well as Arabic countries. So I think this summit is very significant, very meaningful for not only for China, but also for the Arabic world as well as the Middle East.
Well, of course, this meeting is happening with the backdrop of the global energy crisis. We also see that U.S. and allies are trying to put a price cap on the oil imports they would have from Russia. So how do you see the Middle East in terms of energy supply becoming once again an important strategic partner for everyone? What does that mean with that backdrop, this China-Arab summit taking place, rather? Mr. Javan Danfar.
Well, that's an excellent question. The Saudis, especially, who are the world's biggest oil producers, were really angry by the requests from President Biden to keep their oil prices, to try to keep their oil prices down. Because basically the Saudi view is, well, we don't ask you to keep the price of your weapons down when you sell weapons to us, so why are you asking us to sell oil at a lower price? So the Saudis are trying to find competition. They try to create a bigger competition in the market, energy market, so that they could sell their oil at a higher price. Let's not forget that Prince Mohammed bin Salman has a huge multi-billion-dollar, hundreds of billions of dollars in the Saudi vision to diversify Saudi economy away from oil. And for that, he needs massive investment. And to get that massive investment, he needs to sell his oil to the highest bidder. So I think this is where China comes in. It's very important for the Saudis and other oil producers to balance their economic relations. China is an important customer for oil, for energy. This is one of the underpinning foundations of this summit. Also, why some Middle Eastern countries are trying to improve their economic relations with China.
Mr. Zhou, your thoughts?
Yes. I think one of the important things we should mention here is no matter whether China offers aid to every country or whether China just have an equal trade deal with every country, China never add any political strings attached. So that's why most of the Arabic countries trust China more than they trust America, even though they have relations with America much earlier than with China. But still, they think China is a reliable partner.
What about the backdrop of energy crisis in the world? And China certainly is one of the largest importer of energy, arguably the largest of oil in the world.
Of course, we know that is Saudi Arabia, just 18% of Saudi Arabia oil is to China. And China never asked Saudi Arabia to cut their production and to reduce their prices. And China always just have equal and the attitude towards Saudi Arabia's policy making and also OPEC plus policy making. China never criticized Saudi Arabia for this or for that, but do the comparison with the United States policy. They always ask Saudi Arabia to do this, to do that, something only basis on their middle term election, never care about what their decision, what their demands fit Saudi Arabia's national interest or not. But I think I'm very happy to see not only energy cooperation we have developed very well with Arabic country, but on infrastructure, on something like roads, bridge, plants, school, and hospitals. We also have a very good cooperation with Egypt, with Iraq, with Algeria. And also for three most richest country in Arabic world, like Saudi Arabia and UAE, as well as Qatar. We have photovoltaic industry corporation, 5G corporation, and even corporation in space field. So that is, we are updating our corporation.
So it seems, Professor Mahoney, that Mr. Zhou wants to emphasize on multi-pillar in terms of this cooperation, not just energy.
That's right. He's right to note that that we see that we're expected to see maybe 200 agreements signed at this summit, and they will touch on energy security. They will touch on cross investment. We know that that there's a lot of Arab investment in China, a lot of Chinese investment in the Arab world. And they want to strengthen these relations and make sure that these investments continue to grow and prove profitable for both sides. And there's a desire, I think, as Saudi Arabia in particular starts to move towards a post-oil future, that they need to be able to develop their economy and even to take advantage, perhaps, of China's capacities in producing renewable energy, green development, so forth and so on. Saudi Arabia has a lot of oil, but it also has a lot of sun. And so I think that what you're seeing here, not only with the current trade, China currently needs oil. These countries need big development projects, but we're also seeing, I think, building towards a future where in the future we'll see more bilateral trade, more multilateral trade, and we'll see more connections through these Belt Road projects that create networks and nodes that not only facilitate the transfer of energy, but trade and cultural exchanges and so forth and so on.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
There has been quite some readjustment of international supply chains and value chains in recent months. So how do you see the future mapping of growth and development in China and in the Arab world? How is that likely to create more opportunities of cooperation and synergy between the two? Mr. Zhou.
Of course, I suppose after CPC 20th Congress, I'm sure, and through this summit, China may have the different levels to have a cooperation with the Arabic country, such as the richest country. China may just enhance some high-tech cooperation. Some energy country, China may just strengthen the cooperation on the oil, energy, and the gas. And for some poor country, China may offer more infrastructure construction project. So I suppose we cannot have a united policy towards all 23 Arabic countries, but we may just what do we say, do at our most to help each Arabic countries for their modernization process.
There's a lot of pragmatism in the air, as we know. It's less about ideology and values, but rather more on pragmatic issues that both sides are looking at and trying to seek some common ground. So from that perspective, how do you see, the future of this cooperation?
Well, I think it's clear to many in the world, perhaps not the United States and maybe some countries in Western Europe, but that China is going to be a pivotal country, a major power for many, many years to come. And already is the biggest trading partner of most countries in the world. People are looking very actively towards this future. And building relations and building overlapping development strategies and cross investments in order to sustain that relationship, in order to create the conditions that allow these types of relationships to continue to grow and improve over time. You know, one of the things that I see from my vantage point here at the university in Shanghai is we see more and more students coming from the Middle East, learning Chinese, studying in Shanghai. I'm sure something similar is happening in Beijing and other places. And this is where you see you know, people thinking about a future where they have in mind the role that China will play, not only in their development, but in global security and global trade and commerce.
We have seen players such as the United States trying to come up with some kind of role in its dealing with the Arab countries. Though in recent years, we haven't seen much success, at least in Washington's efforts, but rather wars, for example, that's taking place in Iraq and elsewhere, Yemen, just to name a few. So when China is engaging economically and through trade with the Arab countries, how much is China willing to go into some of the complexities among relations of the Arab countries? And can China afford to not to do that while at the same time advance trade and economic ties? Professor Zhou Rong, briefly.
You know, China has a very good relation with Syria. You know, Syria does not have diplomatic ties with Turkey. Syria has some problem with the rest of the Arab country. But China never showed their coldness towards Syria. Even the COVID-19, China still just offers some drugs to Syria. But on the other hand, China knows there's there are differences, even contradiction between Saudi Arabia and Iran. But China maintained good relations with both Saudi Arabia and Iran, never encouraged the conflict, always try to pacify them, let them to encourage them to have a talk, use a dialogue process to deal with their problem. And also China knows the development levels are different. China may also just basis on the individual countries' characteristic to offer their cooperation with them.
Well, I think at the very least, China won't intentionally exacerbate tensions between these countries, as the U.S. Too often has. You know, while Beijing is unlikely to position itself between or above countries, or as Professor Zhou said, unlikely to sell weapons to one side that might be at war with another side. And while China will hesitate to mediate differences, and you know, we've seen this with China's friendship with both Russia and Ukraine. It's taken a neutral position, and this is so far a foreign policy principle that is unlikely to come apart very soon, because it's served China's interests very well. But nevertheless, I think China's growing position in the Middle East will foster more economic growth and development. It will therefore contribute likely to increasing security and stability. And this will help various states feel less vulnerable overall, and perhaps more likely to tolerate differences among themselves and to work through their problems. Additionally, you know, if some of these states join the Shanghai Cooperation Organization or other international organizations that China plays a leading role in, this may be opportunities for them to work together and build trust and goodwill that could transfer to other areas where they have problems that need to be addressed.
You can try not to offend 23 countries at the same time, but good luck to you. It's very difficult. Let's not forget that you have, as you quite rightly said, there are 23 different countries with different geopolitical interests, with different strategic interests, with different economic resources. And that's just the Arab countries. Let's not forget there's Iran, which is not an Arab country. There's Turkey, there's Israel. It's like solving a Rubik cube, trying to keep them all at the same time happy and at the same time balanced. Is that possible? No, it's not possible. Sometimes China will find itself supporting one side inadvertently more than the other, because China has also got its own interests. Yes, I can see that as a goal, China wants to keep everybody happy in this region, try to do business with everybody, trying to balance its relationship, but it can do it, but it's not always going to succeed. And don't be surprised if you're not going to succeed, because it's impossible.
And,
it's tough, Mr. Zhou.
Yes, good. And I would like to add some points. What we see that is a lot of the Arabic countries would like to be the member of ICO, or operational member of ICO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And even Saudi Arabia would like to be BRICS Plus. So that's very significant. We can see the Arabic country, I think traditionally they would like to maintain the good relationship with the United States as well as Europe. Right now, they would more eagerly to have a good cooperation with China and the Eastern Asian countries. So that's very significant. For this kind of background, for the summit, is the more important. It's much more meaningful beyond the summit itself.
We have seen efforts being made both by the United States, for example, crystallized by the U.S. President's visit to Saudi Arabia in recent months, and also by China, of course. This time we have seen this elevated cooperation through China-Arab Summit. How do the Arab countries or the Arab world, in your eyes, are interpreting today's world and try to make the best out of it? Pragmatism, in a way, from your perspective, Professor Mahoney.
Historically, some Gulf Arab states have had closer ties with the U.S. Strategically and economically. However, there have often been difficult periods, including the oil shock years of the 1970s, the Arab opposition to U.S. policy supporting Israel, and a multitude of new complications following the first Gulf War and the second Gulf War and the so-called War on Terror. Now, today, U.S. and Gulf Arab relations are in a period of relative decline, in part because of frictions between the Biden administration and the Saudi leadership, but also due to OPEC output cuts and a time of inflation, and likewise due to shifting U.S. strategic interest, and all the more so after 2 decades of America's heavy hand in the Middle East, which unintentionally, perhaps, empowered Shiite-oriented states where Sunnis previously held sway. These developments, plus America's schizoid approaches to Iran, as well as its failures in Afghanistan, its abandonment of the Kurds, and so on, has left many doubting whether the U.S. is a reliable strategic partner, and indeed perhaps something much worse. Of course, the U.S. remains a major oil customer and supplier of military equipment, among other vital trade, and the U.S. position on the dollar is critical to global oil trade. So there's been no wholesale breakdown in relations, but they have cooled considerably, starting with Obama, with a slight improvement under Trump, but now a new downward trend with Biden. But when we put this in perspective with China, China's relations with the Gulf Arab states have existed for a long time, but they've also grown consistently. The fact of the matter is China more than any other country, more than any other major power in the world, has positive relations with most of them, if not all of them, in one form or another. And I don't think that we can find very many other countries that have been able to maintain such a balance and such a positive overall structure. And I think that many of the countries there, although they might be disappointed with this development or that development, they need to stay connected to China in positive ways. So I'm not too concerned about always having to please everyone or settle differences. Now, in fact, we know that China is already the major trading partner, including the biggest economy there, Saudi Arabia. And furthermore, despite U.S. efforts to encourage Arab countries to condemn Chinese policies in Xinjiang, we've seen very little Arab support for the U.S. position. And more importantly, the Arab states have rebuffed U.S. requests that they choose sides as the U.S. advances its decoupling, if not a new Cold War against China. So in the meantime, I think we also have to look very carefully and optimistically about the ongoing negotiations between China and Saudi Arabia about the possibility of settling oil deals in the yuan. And if successful, this would be a huge step forward, one that would undercut the dollar and be a major disappointment for China, for Washington. And I think this is the broader geostrategic picture. This is the view from Beijing, but also from the Middle East.
Saudi Arabia, you can say, used to be the center, used to be the Egypt, but right now in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf countries. So when China's cooperation with Gulf countries successful, so we can say China's cooperation with the Arabic world will be successful, vice versa. And another thing, what is important, why in the future, if there's any problem between Arabic country, between the relation between the Arabic country with China, it must have some American element. So in the future, whether the relationship develop well or not, we have to consider American elements that will not be positive, maybe negative.
Again, I have to go back to my original point. This is all about balancing. The countries in this region are concerned about the US losing interest in this region. The US has got other priorities in Ukraine and its strategic competition with China. So the countries in this region are trying to balance. They're going to improve their relations with China as it's an emerging, it is an economic superpower. But at the same time, I think they're going to also maintain their relationship with the United States because they want to be able to play off both China and the United States against each other to get the best deals possible. And I think where China is coming in terms of economic infrastructure project, it's going to increase its influence in this region. It's going to have a positive impact on the economy of this region. But at the same time, I think the countries in this region will want to maintain good relations with the United States because the United States is also a very important military and economic player.
Thank you so much for the three of you. Mayor Javad Danfar, Joe Rohn, last but not least, Professor Mahoney, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.